Hey, what's going on, guys? Today I'm going to show you guys how to use your TV or your monitor as your background for your photo scenes. If you want to learn more, stick around. So I used to think throwing a picture up on my television screen and using it as my background for my scenes was cheating. And then I went and started trying to do it myself and realized it's much more complicated than I thought. So today I want to share with you guys my tips to give me really cool results like this. All right, let's get into this, guys. All right, so the first tip I want to share is regarding color temperature. So when you choose a photograph for your background scene, pay attention to the photograph itself, and you need to determine what the color temperature is for that photograph. So what do I mean by color temperature? Well, if you look at your lights, you'll probably notice they have a range on them. They can vary from light to light. They usually go somewhere from, say, 2500 K, which stands for Kelvin, up to maybe some go 6,000 or even higher. And the way to look at this is, if you notice, your low numbers are your warmer tones, which is more of your yellow, and your cooler is your higher number, which is going to be more of a bluish tone. So the first thing you need to do is recognize your color temperature in that photograph. There's no, at least not that I'm aware of, no secret formula for determining that. You just kind of have to look at it and see. Sometimes it can be deceiving because you might have a cooler tone in the photograph, but maybe that photograph has some warm, smaller light sources in it. So that might be able to throw you off. Usually once I get the scene set up and start looking through camera, I can usually tell pretty easily. I'm gonna show you guys the way that I prefer to do this. First step, like I said, we've determined the color temperature in our background photograph. Now, what we need to do is make the lighting on our scene also match that color temperature. So in this example, I'm going to show you this photograph is a much cooler background temperature. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to adjust our lighting so it's at the higher numbers, more of that blue tone, so that it matches the overall scene better. Now, with that being said, once I do that, a lot of times I get into my camera and I look, and I still notice that that background is a lot more blue than my scene. And that's okay, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some adjustments in post to fix that problem. And it's really actually quite a simple fix. Now, if editing's not your thing, maybe you don't edit at all, maybe you don't have a good program to edit in, one of the things you can do is you can go into your camera for the white balance settings and adjust this. I tend to shoot with my camera on auto white balance, but when I go through my settings, there's a whole bunch of different settings that'll give you different tones of warm to cooler. So one thing you can do is look at the screen on your camera or through the viewfinder and just cycle through those white balance settings until it looks right to you. Like I said, when I'm on auto white balance, usually my screen still looks a lot more blue or cooler than I can really get the rest of my scene to look using my lights. And so like I said, I can scroll through those settings and get it to look more even. But like I said, for me, I don't like to fiddle with that, because then I'll forget and leave that setting on there, and then I'll go to shoot video or something and it'll completely screw me up because my white balance is off. So like I said, I'll show you guys what I do in post to fix that, and it's actually a really simple fix. All right, so here, guys, I do my editing in Lightroom. This is the color temperature bar, not what you want to mess with. So what you want to do is you want to scroll down here to this section, color mixer. In the color mixer, scroll down to your saturation. And all you're going to do is lower the blues until it looks the way you like it. And guys, if you're using a warm background, it's the same thing, except you're going to want to lower your yellows. Okay, so once we've got the temperature set to match our background, our scene's ready to go, the next step we got to do, which is very important, is you've got to make sure your background photo is oriented properly, meaning it has the proper perspective to match your scene. So I'll give you a quick example of that. If you're looking through your camera, let's say you're shooting a little bit lower than your scene. If you notice the ground of the scene in your camera and you're shooting low, for example, you'll see kind of an upward angle of your ground piece, right? So what you need to make sure is that the photograph behind your scene matches that. What you don't want is your angle of your ground to be slightly going up like this, and all of a sudden when it hits your background screen, it's doing a much sharper angle like this, right? It doesn't make sense. It's not natural. Something you got to pay attention to. And that's a really simple fix, okay? You just got to raise or lower your photo on your background so that that angle of your perspective matches with your scene, so it flows just kind of seamlessly. It looks like it's just going off into the photograph. If that's off, it's not going to look realistic. And that's going to be a major problem. The next major step, which is kind of in the same vein, is to make sure your background is the right perspective. It doesn't make any sense if, for example, you've got, say, a room on your background screen with a doorway, and that doorway is way too small or way too big to match the perspective of your scene. So you need to make sure you scale the photo in the background properly so that it looks like it's the right scale, right? It's no different than you wouldn't build a diorama piece to put behind your characters that's way too big or way too small, right? So it's the same concept. Make sure your photograph is sized properly as well. Okay, another thing you're gonna have to watch out for when you're doing this, I get this question quite often. It's actually pretty simple. When I'm shooting a scene, say I'm using a black backdrop, I can pretty much put my lights anywhere that I want to. But when you're using a screen, it tends to reflect light back, and you'll see your lights in your scene. So the easiest thing that I've found to do with this, usually I have to move my lights out further until I can no longer see the reflection in the screen. Sometimes you can change the angles of them slightly. That'll get them to disappear sometimes. Another thing I do sometimes is I'll use characters or props. If you'll notice where the reflection of your lights are in your background, sometimes you can position them just properly so that maybe your character, for example, is hiding that as well. That's another little technique that I use sometimes. But when in doubt, the easiest thing to do is just push those lights out a little bit further and turn them up, make them a little bit brighter so they're still properly lighting your scene. Okay, and the last tip for this, one thing you'll notice is visible when you have your base piece where it actually butts up next to your TV screen. When you're looking at that, you can see the line that goes across. It doesn't really look natural. If you leave that, it's really gonna stick out like a sore thumb. So what I tend to do to get around that is use props in your scene. It can be anything, big, small, whatever, and just kind of try to make it look natural in your scene and stack stuff across that line can cover it up. A lot of times I even use like dirt or something. Just a little bit of dirt built up just breaks up that straight line. That makes it look crazy. Now, you can always go into post if you're good at editing, and there's multiple techniques you can do in post to get rid of that line. Me personally, I prefer to do as much practically as I can to save me from doing stuff like that in editing, because the last thing I want to do is rely on editing and then go in and it just not look right and to be a struggle. And next thing I know, I'm having to do research on trying to figure out some new technique or something to get it to look right, when I literally could have taken a minute of my time to do it practically in the scene and save myself from the whole headache. But that's entirely up to you. Like I said, if you're good at editing, you enjoy editing, then you can always just edit that out in post. All right, guys, so I hope this helped you learn how to use your backgrounds on your scene. It is tricky. It's not easy like I thought it was when I first started doing it. And even when I did try it initially, I didn't really care for it because it was technically difficult. And so I kind of shied away from it for a while. But then I got kind of bored with using the same props and diorama pieces that I had over and over again. And so I kind of went back to using screens because it gives you really an unlimited amount of variety to choose from. And the more you practice doing this, the easier it'll get. And if you notice in my photos now, probably 90% of my photos I'm doing this because it's not difficult anymore. So hopefully this will help you guys out. If you did enjoy the video, I would greatly appreciate a thumbs up, a subscribe if you're not subscribed already, and I will catch you guys on the next one.